Hey everyone, Jacob here. Today in this Blender tutorial, we are going to go over creating this piano keyboard from start to finish, including all the different keys, the backboard, and then to top it all off, we'll go over creating a lighting setup and then also rendering the image. And this is, hopefully what we can get by the end. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Alright, so before we get started, we're going to go up here, we're going to get File, and then we're going to get a new project with just a general layout. And this is what you can expect when you start any new scene. You got the default cube in the middle, the light up in the top, and then also the camera. And we're not going to delete any of these yet because we're actually going to work with these to get the project started. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we save the file. I don't know if you can see the pop-up here, but we're just going to save that to the desktop. And it's always important to save the file at the beginning and also save constantly throughout the project. And the reason because of that is just, you might get a crash and, you never want to lose data, especially if you're far into a project. So it's always best to just get in the habit of doing it early, and that goes with every software. I'm going to set on the screencast key so that way you can see what I'm doing as I do it. And then down at the bottom there, you can look and just kind of watch what key presses I use, so that way I don't have to explain all of them. Now anyways, we're going to be using Blender today because it is free, so that way anybody watching this tutorial can just download it onto their computer, and it's not going to be a very memory intensive project, so you don't have to worry too much about the specs of your computer. But either way, go out, download Blender now. It's blender.org. That's blender.org. So just download whatever version is current, but right now we're going to be working in Blender 2.8. Something I do also want to go over before we get started is how you should follow this tutorial, because I know I've watched a lot of tutorials and I haven't necessarily gotten everything from them, and that's okay if that's not what you're here for. But if you really want to get the best experience, then I recommend that you open up Blender as well and follow along with everything that I do to so that way you can get the most of it and remember the most of it. Also, I suggest if you have any confusion about anything, especially key presses, definitely go back. Feel free to re-watch parts, so that way you're all caught up and you don't miss anything down the road. Also, I'm going to be going through this relatively quickly. I recommend that you slow down and you take a little bit more time, so that way you can have the result that you're happy with, as opposed to just something that I do, which while I'm doing a tutorial I might rush things like proportions or getting the exact colors right. And then also one more thing, try to do something different than what I do, whether that be the way that you set up the lights or how you want to frame the image. I just recommend that you do something different, push yourself outside your comfort zone, so that way you can actually show yourself that you are learning something. Alright, let's get started with the black keys. To create this black key, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure we get the general proportions of it right, and then we'll go in and we'll do the detail work like the beveled edge and things like that. So to start, we're just going to go into edit mode, make sure we got the face select on there, and then we're just going to grab this side, and I'm doing it along the x-axis, and that's actually going to come and play an important role later when we start doing modifiers. But first I'm just going to grab this face and then bring that out. I'm going to click G then X, that way it constrains it to the x-axis. And then I just want to get that to be about the general size that you would expect to see from the black key on a piano. And this is a great time to go and check out references if you got a piano nearby. Something like that, or just look for pictures online, so that way you can get the proportions a little bit more accurate to what I might have now or what you might think would be correct. And then we're just going to grab that top face there, and we're going to click S and then Y, and then just scale that in, so that way it's got kind of a nice curved top to it, because if you look at black keys on a piano, they're not entirely straight in that way. And then the same thing goes here. We're just going to go into edge select for this edge right here, because that's typically kind of inset in on a piano keyboard, although probably not that much, just a very subtle amount there. And then what we're going to do from there, now that we got this little French fry looking thing, we're going to go into modifiers, and we're going to add a bevel modifier. And you'll see what that does, just gives a slight bevel to all of the edges uniformly. And that's kind of what we want there, although I don't know that the bottom necessarily needs it. It'll be kind of hidden, so it's really not a big deal. So what we're going to do is we're just going to change the width to something that looks nice for this size. Right now you see it's kind of blocky, so we're just going to go into segments, and I'm going to put it around, yeah, 5 looks nice. We don't want that number to be too high because it does make it smoother looking, but at the same time it vastly increases the amount of geometry in the scene, and we want to be conscious of that, so that way we can have the most efficient file possible and cut down on render times too. But I'm going to hit space, and then that brings up a little search menu, and I am just going to type in smooth, and that's going to be smooth shade right there, and that's what I want. So what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that way when it shades the object, instead of the hard lines, it's just going to kind of smooth it over a little bit. So it makes the amount of segments less visible, but you can see how it has some weird effects as we kind of make it less, so I'm going to put that back up to 5 there. Now that we got the general shape of the black key down, we're going to go and we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to create a white key. And right now we just need one of each, and then we'll go in and multiply them across later. But one big thing here is you want to base the size of the white key that you create off of the black key, because they are going to be working together, and you don't want that proportion to look weird when you get the final image in. So I'm just going to bring that down there. I'm not going to bring it completely below, so that way it kind of hides that extra bevel that we don't really need. And then I'm just going to hit S and then Y, so we can kind of get the general size that we want for our keys here. I think maybe a little bit bigger than that. Although again, definitely check references because I might be completely off here. But we can always change it a little bit later too if we need. Anyways, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the white key, where we just grab that face. We're going to bring that out along the x-axis. And the thing about the white keys on the piano is they typically extend much further than the black keys. So be sure to get that proportion right between here and here. And I think that should be good right about there. And then I'm also going to bring this face down, so that way we get the depth that we want out of a piano key. And then also on a white piano key, there is kind of an extrusion where the top of this key here is pulled out a little bit further than everything else. So that's what we're going to go ahead and create next. We're going to go in and we're going to add a loop cut using Control R, and then just bring that up to where we kind of want that lip to be. I think there it looks nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these faces individually, and I'm going to click E and just extrude that out a little bit. And then for this next side, you want to be it's important, since we already did this first one, you're going to want to click the one on the side and then also hold Shift and then click this one here, because you want both of those, or else the result you get is just that one coming out and you have that weird edge there. So make sure that you grab both of those faces, then extrude that out a little bit. And then, of course, the same thing on the other side. There, it's about even. Maybe not perfect, but a little bit closer. And then we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to add a bevel modifier. The thing about this, though, is the white keys have a lot less bevel than the black keys, so we're just going to keep that in mind, so that way it's not as strong. And actually, I think that's about good. We're going to do the same thing, just add some segments there. And then smooth shade. And then that is pretty much done for creating the first white key, of course, not with materials. Now that we've got one of each key created, we can go ahead and we can make an array modifier, so that way we can get the rest of the keys on the keyboard as opposed to just the one. And to do that, it's very simple. We're just going to go up here into the modifiers panel while we have the object selected, and we're going to click array. It's the first one under generate. You can see that it put the other instance of the object here on this other side, and that's just because right here under the relative offset we've got it set to 1 in the x-axis direction. So we just want to switch that back and put the 1 right here so that way it iterates along the y-axis. And this might be different for you, as I said before, how which way we extruded in the beginning can have an effect, and that is where that comes in there. And what I'm going to do from here is I'm actually going to move the array modifier up 1 above the bevel, because the proportions get affected very slightly for the offset. So we just want to make sure that that is where we want it. And then here for the size, I'm going to change that from 1 to 1.01. Whoops, 0.1. And that'll create a slight gap between the keys. Then I'm just going to go ahead and put from 2 to 52, so that way instead of the 2 keys, we've got a full keyboard full of white keys. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to grab these 2 sides, and then I'm going to just scale those out on the y-axis, just so that way there's a little bit less of a gap underneath the keys there, under that ridge, and that looks about good. And there is the first set of the white keys done. Now we can go over and we can start working on the black keys here. So for the black keys, we're going to do pretty much the same thing that we did for the white keys. I'm going to start by just moving this over so that way it's centered between 2 white keys there on the gaps. And I'm actually going to make it, or actually I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because I don't know that the size ratio is entirely perfect there, as good as it could be. But anyways, from there what we're going to do is just the same thing that we did before, and since there's a key theoretically between each one of these cracks, except we know that there's the 2-3-2-3 pattern, which we'll get to later, but there should be 51 cracks between each of these. So we're going to do the same thing, just add an array, put it up above the bevel, set that to 0, set that to 1, and we can see that it bumps up right next to it. So again, we're going to want to kind of change that offset just a little bit, so that way it's more or less in the middle. And then we're going to change this from 2 to 51, and that should put a key all the way on the other side here. And it doesn't perfectly fit up, so we're just going to go in and we're going to kind of fine tune this number, and it's going to be different for everybody, so just kind of play around with it a little bit until you get the keys lined up perfectly in between all of the cracks. The number for me is 1.771, so a very peculiar number. Now what we're going to do to get that pattern of the 2-3-2-3 is we're going to click apply on this array modifier. So what that is going to do is, instead of making all of these dependent on the first one where we can grab one face and it affects all of them, it's going to make it so that way they're all their own individual editable objects. So we're just going to click apply there, and you can see now that we go back into edit mode, all of these can be edited individually, and that's exactly what we want because we're going to delete a good number of these. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go in and I'm going to select one face of each group of the between the 2 3s. You can see I'm just selecting the ones that we want to delete, which are not these groupings here. Alright, now that I got one of each of the black keys selected, or one part of each of the black keys selected that I'm going to delete, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control and then plus on the D-pad. Now if you don't have a D-pad, what you're going to want to do, we'll just go back to, it's not letting me, but go back to just having one of each of them selected, click Select, and yeah, you should, under Select More or Less, just click More, and it's going to select around all of what you've already got selected, and then you're just going to want to keep clicking that until you've got the entirety of these black keys selected that you do want to delete. And then from there, simple, just click the delete button, and then we're going to delete vertices, and that's going to delete everything that was just selected. And now you'll see we've got these nice groupings of the black keys between the white keys, just like we want. Then it's starting to look a little bit more like a keyboard too, which is perfect. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the frame of the keyboard, so that way it's not just hovering here over nothing. We want there to be an actual support for these. So we're going to start by clicking Shift-A, add, and then we're going to add a new plane in. That's going to put it very small there in comparison to everything we've already got in the scene. So actually, instead of making that bigger, I'm just going to scale this down. So that way it's something a little bit more manageable too. So I'm just going to take this plane and I'm going to move it over so that way it's more or less in the middle. I'm going to hit 7 on the D-pad so that way I can get a top-down view a little bit more accurately, see what I'm looking at here. So that looks like it's about in the middle, and I'm just going to scale that out just like that. And it looks like my screencast key is turned off there. Alright. So what I did was I just clicked S for scale, and then I clicked Y, so that way it scales along the Y-axis there. I'm just going to pull that out, and then I can recenter it a little bit. And then there we kind of got the bottom of the keyboard frame there. Just going to move that over, scale it out a little bit more so that way it fits in this direction better. And then I'm going to go here into edit mode, and I'm going to select this edge here, and I'm going to extrude that up, and I'm actually going to go into the side view here so that way I can see what I'm looking at better again. Extrude that up, and then I'm going to extrude that out. Whoops. And then back down again. And that's just going to create a lip under the main part of the keyboard. And I'm going to go in and kind of make that fit a little bit snugger, look a little bit nicer. Then I'm going to bring that up to about there. And then on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab this edge right here. I'm going to bring that back a little bit, extrude it up. And I'm not sure that I want it cutting through the back of those black keys, so I'm just going to, actually I'm going to bring that out there, and I'm going to bring the black keys forward a little bit more. And the reason for that is if you look on a keyboard, you can see behind the black keys because they don't go all the way back in. And then from here, I'm just going to grab, this edge here on the top that we were using before. And then I'm just going to kind of make a little bit of a design, a little bit of a pattern, so that way it looks a little bit more like a keyboard as opposed to, some keys sitting on a table. I'm going to go up like that. I'm going to bring it back along that way. Whoops, that's a little bit too much there. And then bring it back down. So from here you can see we've got a little bit of, a little backing to that keyboard. And again, I can go in and edit that a little bit more. This is another place that I definitely encourage you, if you are up to the task, to make a little bit more of a design here, something that looks a little bit more realistic or fun. Because this is something that you can kind of take creative control of. Now that we've got the main part of this keyboard frame here, I'm going to add some little end caps to it so that way it doesn't just cut off right there. I'm going to go in here into edge select, And then to select the whole ring of edges along the outside, just hold down Alt, and then click the edge that you want, and it'll get that whole row along there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude this out there along the y-axis. And now that I got a little bit of the shape that I'm going for, I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to just delete some of these faces. And the reason for that is I kind of want to stitch together something new from, the geometry that we've got here. I'm going to extrude that up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to extrude that up an exact amount, and what that's going to be is I'm going to go over here to snapping, and I'm going to snap to vertex. What I can do is I can click G, Z, so that way it's grabbing it along the Z axis, and then hold down Control, and then you can select the vertice that you want it to snap to, like along the Z axis. That's a very useful tool, and that's what I'm going to do right there. And I'm going to delete these 3 faces here because we're going to reconstruct those in a second here anyways. I'm going to grab this and that, and I'm going to grab this face as well. So we got all of the faces on these 2 sides, and I'm going to click F, and that's going to create a new face along there. And we're going to do the same thing with these 3. And then here, I'm going to grab this vertice, click E, X, and then hold Control so that way it's moving it in line with that vertice there. And then I'm just going to grab these 3 edges, I guess 4 edges, and click F, create a new face there. I'm going to do the same thing here. This is going to look really ugly, not the best topology practice, but it works for our purpose. And there we go, we've got that face created. And just out of sake of it bothering me, I'm going to move that down to be in line with that. And then instead of doing the whole same thing on the other side, we can just go in, we can click Control R, and that'll make a loop cut right there, and just click right in the middle and then right click so that way it sets it to the default. So we're just going to go right in the middle there. And then we're going to actually delete half these vertices here. And then we can go in and we can add a mirror modifier, which will mirror the geometry that we've already got along whichever axis we want. In this case, it's the x-axis or the y-axis, not the x-axis. And there we've got both sides of this piano keyboard done. Before we go into making the materials for this, though, we're going to want to go and add some bevel to this, just the same as we added to the other keys, although we are going to use a different method. And the reason we're doing this is that way it's not a uniform bevel across the entire object like we wanted for the keys. We want it to have more bevel in certain places and less in other places. And to do that, we're going to use something that's not a modifier. We're just going to click Control B, and I've got these 2 edges here selected, and you can see how that brings that out. You can use your mouse to determine how much you want, and then the middle mouse button will determine how many divisions there are. So I just right click so it didn't do anything, but I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select these ones too because I want them to have the same amount of bevel. I'm going to click Control B, just like that, and then I think that's about how much I want for that edge there. Similarly, we can do the same thing here. Click Control B, and then I want it a little bit less here because it's a smaller feature. And then I'm also going to go here and do the edges along this. Whoops, I've already got those other ones selected. Let's go back there. There we go. And you can see that kind of does a weird bevel there, and the reason is because there's some geometry here that that makes these edges not want to bevel too far, or kind of pushes it to bevel in a certain direction. So we're just going to correct that a little bit afterwards. We're going to do the bevel, and we're going to make sure that it's just like kind of a small amount there, and it doesn't really look like it's doing anything, and that's all right for now. Because what we're going to do is we can go in and we can just click SX or SZ and then scale it there, so that way we can kind of get it the size that we want it to be. Whoops. Then you can see there that actually gave it a little bit more of a bevel, although it's doing some weird things on this end. And I can just grab those and scale those in the other direction on the x-axis to get that bevel to pop out a little bit more there. Sometimes you have to correct it to get the result that you want. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to bevel this edge too a little bit, and you see that since it kind of shares that corner there, it's doing that same weird thing. So we're just going to scale that along the x-axis, pull that bevel out a little bit more. You can see that all starting to look nice, although that looks a little bit protruded and I'm not sure why. I think that's funny. It kind of, you can see this example, it scaled out and then it kind of pulled it out of the geometry and made it look a little bit wonky. So I'm actually just going to kind of leave that as it is, and you can see there's still a little bit of a bevel on it, which is fine for me. But anyways, from here we are going to start jumping into the materials, and we will start right here with this the backboard. We're going to go over here under context, that little sphere, and this is our materials menu, and we're going to click new material. And one thing we're actually going to want to double check too is that we are in the right rendering engine. And when we eventually render it out, we're going to be using Eevee. We can also use cycles a little bit, but for now we're actually going to just stick with Eevee because that gives us the quick real-time rendering that we want. So that way we can also help us, determine lighting and things like that as well. But anyways, we're going to go back, make sure that you clicked new material, and then make sure we've got this principled BSDF shader. And what this is it's PBR, which is physically based rendering. So you can make changes here a lot easier and it'll look more realistic than it would if you were doing the whole node setup. In a lot of cases, although more detailed things are going to need textures and things like that. So anyways, I'm going to go up here to viewport shading. Be sure to click preview so that way you can see what you're making here also as you go along. And then for the base color, we just want kind of a dark gray, black color. And then we're going to also alter roughness a little bit. I think, actually I kind of, a little bit more rough I would say. Just because it's the backboard, it's not really supposed to be that shiny. Going to bring down the color just a little bit as well. And for the most part, this is all we really need to do for this particular part. Now another thing though is if you are following along, I definitely recommend that you spend a little bit more time here. You kind of figure out what values work for you, and then also you can go in if you know texture mapping and UV unwrapping, then this is a great place to practice that so you can get more details in there. And I'm actually going to go in also and be sure to smooth shade this, and that was doing something wonky. I'm going to go back into flat shade for now. I'm not sure what that issue was. That shouldn't happen when you do it though. It should work properly. I don't know what happened there with the topology. But anyways, that's just a me issue. When I did the project the last few times, that did not happen, just a quirk of the software. But anyways, from here I'm going to select the black keys, and I'm going to do the same thing. And it's already got a material assigned to it from before, so I'm going to click base color, and then I'm going to make that nearly completely black, because they are the black keys, of course. We do want them to be quite a bit darker. And then we're going to go in and we're going to also alter the roughness. And I'm going to set that at 0.4, just like that. So that way it's got a nice shine to it, but not an overbearing shine. I'm going to do the same thing to the white keys, add a new material. And I'm going to keep these ones white, of course, because it is the white keys on the keyboard. And I'm going to go and I'm going to set that also to 0.4. Whoops, set the wrong thing. Want to make sure it's roughness. And there, that was very, very simple materials, but that is essentially what it takes for that. Now for the lighting here, I'm going to go with kind of a cotton candy looking thing with like a blue and pink is the theme I want to go with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that main light there, and I'm going to change that to an area light. And you can see if you zoom in really far that now instead of just a point as it was before, it's got a direction that it comes out of and then also a shape. So that way it actually has volume as opposed to just a single instance. And I'm going to scale that up a little bit. I'm going to go click N and then go into the transform tools, and I'm going to set the rotation 0, 0, 0 so that way we can work with it without it being at a weird angle. And I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis 90 degrees. Well, I'm going to try to turn it 90 degrees, but I guess I got to go -90 in this instance. I'm going to click 7 on the numpad, go into top view. And I'm going to just bring that right over here. I'm going to scale that in along the X a little bit and make it also a lot taller. And this is that way we can get the camera from this point of view and see the reflections coming off. And you can see already in this preview that it's definitely got that effect that we're going for. Although we are going to change the color, feel free to change this to whatever you want because it's really up to personal preference and then what style you're kind of looking to achieve. And I think that looks nice. I'm going to go in and I'm actually just going to make this material a little bit shinier because now that we have the light we can kind of determine what we're looking for a little bit better. Alright, and I think that looks nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the top view again and I'm just going to duplicate that light using Shift D, and I'm going to bring it to this area and then rotate it at kind of where we want the camera at, so that way we get the reflections all the way across. And I'm going to change this to a light blue color. Ooh, that teal looks nice too. You know what, I changed my mind, I'm going with teal. Last minute decision. And then I'm going to duplicate that again, sorry, don't delete that. And I'm going to reset the rotation back to 0. And then I'm going to rotate it along the y-axis 180 degrees that way. Or I apologize, I guess it'd be about 270. Whoa. Even I get the controls messed up sometimes. Alright, there we go, that's the direction we're looking for. I'm going to bring that down, scale it up a little bit, and then I'm just going to make this the kind of generic white color. Just that way we kind of get like a base level light. We don't want it to be too colorful. And then I'm going to grab that, take the S for saturation, bring that all the way down to 0, and that'll make it just kind of a plain plain white light. I'm going to click Control-Alt-0, and that's going to constrain the camera to my view. I'm going to click G to move that even while we're looking through it, and then you can also double click R, and then it'll let you have a little bit more control over how you angle that there. So now we can see we've kind of got the basics with the color and everything going on. We can play a little bit more with the power of the individual lights, so that way they kind of balance each other and contrast each other nicely. And I might turn that one down to 75. Whoops, 75. Or 750, that is. And then I think that's about nice for the purposes of this tutorial. Then we're going to go in and I'm going to set the background here in the world settings to be completely black, just so that way the focus is on the keyboard and the lights on the keyboard. Alright, now that we got the lighting and the camera work done, it's time to start rendering this out. The first thing I'm going to do is, now that I'm up here in render, I'm going to switch this from Eevee to cycles. And you'll see immediately that takes longer to render, and if you move around you can see that it's a lot grainier too, and that's because it's rendering in a more accurate way to Eevee. It takes less shortcuts, so it's definitely going to be better for the purposes that we're using it for. Although I don't want to see the grainy image, so I'm just going to switch that back to viewport shading, or this one here. And then what I'm going to want to do from here is make sure this is cycles. I'm going to set mine to GPU compute because I want it to be using my graphics card, not my CPU. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make sure the resolution is 1920 by 1080, which is a standard video size, although you can change yours if you want it to be something different than what you'd expect. And then I'm just going to make sure everything down here is correct, and it is. I want a PNG and I want it to be RGBA. And I'm going to click render, and I'm going to click render image. Actually, before I do that, I don't know if the new window will show up. So I'm going to drag this from the bottom so you can see what my output is. I'm just going to go open the UV image editor. You can see I just rendered this previously, but I'm going to click render image, and that's going to render everything with the settings that I chose. And you can see that's starting to come out very similar to what we had up here in the viewport. Although once this is done, unlike what we had in the viewport, you'll be able to export this image and save it and use it for whatever. And now that we got this render result here, we can go in and we can save that image just by going to Image and then Save As. Now, as you can see, that there's definitely a lot of room to improve upon this image, and I'm not going to do it for the sake of time for this tutorial, but some things that you can do is you can go in and add buttons along here for the digital keyboard. I definitely could go back, play with proportions a little bit more on mine, and just add general detail. Also, some other things that would be very helpful in making this look a little bit nicer is working with the materials a little bit more, adding texture maps, so that way there's, you know, some dirt and wear and tear and things like that. But from a general aesthetic point of view, I think this looks pretty nice just for our purposes. And that is it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.